Hi, everyone. Welcome to A Way of God's Remembrance with Michael Hayes. This is presented by Awake to Love. I'm Lee here with Cindy. We are the volunteer Zoom hosts and so grateful that you are here. As a way of introduction, I will read Michael's words to bring clarity to the focus and format of this gathering. This is a weekly gathering for those seeking greater awareness of their true nature. There are many paths and approaches to higher consciousness and to greater awakening to who we truly are. The essence, the truth of all these paths is more about remembering who we are and have always been, rather than becoming something different or more than we have seen ourselves to be. A way of God's remembrance goes to the heart, to the intention of all the paths. This is what we will explore together each week. Michael will share thoughts and awarenesses that come forward as relevant and purposeful for our time together, followed by questions and answers related to what he shares about. We will begin with an invocation of light to help support us all to be in collective alignment. Fellow messenger of remembrance and my dear friend, Ron Holnick, will lead us in the light invocation. After the light invocation, we will play a recording to lead us in Anai Hugh chanting.
We ready?
Ready.
Okay. Lord God of all creation, we come before you with joy in our hearts this evening, here to listen to and acknowledge the essence of the loving message that Michael has to share for us, which boils down to we are not becoming spiritual beings. We are already, have already, and will always be spiritual beings, for that is our very nature. And for this time together, we are all so grateful. So be it.
Welcome, everybody, to A Way of God's Remembrance. I'm Michael Hayes, and this is a weekly thing that we've been offering, and it seems to be moving people and inspiring people, which is the purpose of it. Simply that the direction came to me that it's time that more people are ready to come into remembrance and just help them to realize what's possible and what's present, and build it and they shall come. So I was thinking about what to talk about, and I had an interesting dream one night where I spent pretty much the whole night in the same dream, and it was a meeting in the spirit world, and it was discussing the difference between the magnetic light and the non-magnetic light. And I'm not saying it was real interesting because it was long, but I was moved by that, and I was reflecting on that when it really comes down to this process of remembrance that we talk about so much in these events, and more I'm hearing other people talk about this. That is really the kind of thing that determines how much we come into remembrance. While we're participating in form in these bodies, we are participating in a magnetic reality. And the physical world, but also the astral plane, causal plane, mental plane, etheric plane, and the other dimensions that are all connected to that are all magnetized. I mean, they all deal in polarity. They deal in um, working with a magnetic light, but also with opposites. They deal with um, the whole experience and the whole reality of differentiation in a very distinct way. Now, there is differentiation in the non-magnetic, but it's very different than in the magnetic realm and magnetic lights. The differentiation in the non-magnetic lights is hard to talk about. It's something that you can experience and you can know. But I remember John Roger, my teacher, saying that when he was trying to talk about things in the non-magnetic, he said, I have to lie to you to try and explain this. And yet there is differentiation, and it is a knowable thing. And we may talk about that. I don't know about tonight, but we may talk about it. But the big thing that we will run into as we want to come more conscious of the reality of the non-magnetic, there will be a pushback in the consciousness of each of us that will try to hold us into the storyline we've been living in time and space and the magnetism. And the primary thing that will be used to hold us back from the non-magnetic and from the full remembrance of that will be ties we have to the magnetic fields of existence. And there's a lot of magnetic fields, a lot of different magnetic fields. And without realizing what's been going on through multitude of lifetimes in time and space, we've created alignments, allegiances, attachments, addictions to different forms of magnetism, different things that in some ways seem like they would work against us, but other ways they seem to really work for us. And the ones that would work against us in an obvious way, most of us would recognize those and know to steer clear of them at this point. Sometimes we don't. And then if the Bible or one of those books, they talk about the seven deadly sins. It's avarice, greed, lust, gluttony. Can't remember them all, and those are pretty obvious. So most of us will know that if we're going down the road where those things are prevalent, we're probably not going to get where we really want to go. And so let's call it the lower magnetism of this creation, we've been working to get free of for a very long time. Now, I referenced this before, maybe in the last class, but one of these classes, I'm sure I referenced that the progression for us in this world, in this physical dimension, was largely, a shifting from relying upon higher magnetic fields rather than the lower magnetic fields. And so we would progress by just learning to work with a higher field. And a lot of things that were worshipped and related to as gods by the ancient peoples were really tied to these higher magnetic forms. And so they would talk about the archetypes, at the etheric or the unconscious level, and the different gods associated with them. And they talk about the astrological zodiac with the names of the different gods and the different planets as representation of these different qualities or these different empowerments. These would all be magnetic. And without realizing it through time, most of us have gotten very entangled with these magnetic fields. And yet, often they've worked well for us. And so they've kind of slipped more into something we do kind of automatically. We'd say even unconsciously. Without realizing it, we're holding on to the magnetic field or allowing it to hold on to us. And for a long time on this planet, that wasn't a disadvantage to us because to get into the non-magnetic was so difficult that it was an exceptional case where conscious really did get into it in any significant way. Sometimes they kind of get into it, but they couldn't stay. Now we're in a time of transcendence where more and more the non-magnetic reality and the non-magnetic truth is available to every one of us. The advent of Jesus and the Christ opportunity that was extended through his actions and through his participation in this creation is very, very tangibly present, and it's going stronger and stronger, getting more and more available to the souls on this planet really every day. It's like a gradual thing, but it's progressively, it isn't changing. It's just getting more and more available. And so that opens the door for us to really have the opportunity to get into the non-magnetic. We go, yay, that's what we want. And then, but as soon as we start to really make that movement into that as a conscious state, it's almost like a tug, and that's a pull from the magnetic trying to hold us back to the old story. And for most of us, the stories that are most compelling and therefore the ones that we would cling to, even though we wouldn't even necessarily realize we're clinging to them, are these things that involve these higher magnetic fields. Many of our aspirations in other lives, our dreams and our goals and our prayers were answered by our involvement with these higher magnetic fields. We gained greater abilities, we gained greater clarity, we gained greater seeing ability, we gained greater power to create and manifest things we wanted in this world. And these all came through these higher magnetic fields. And regardless, the true treasure, the true kingdom of heaven is in the non-magnetic. We could understand the journey from the lower magnetic to the higher magnetic is sort of the journey from what we would think of as bad karma to what we would think of as good karma. So most of our karmas dealing with the higher magnetic, we would actually tend to think of as good karma because it would tend to bestow upon us or grant us favorable outcomes, meaning in terms of we'd be happier, we'd be more satisfied, we'd be more able to have and create and manifest a lot of things we wanted. We say, well, that's really good. I go, well, from one point of view, it is really good. However, when you start to have this deeper call within you, this call to the truth of God and the wholeness of your true nature and the wholeness of God's true nature being available to you, then that's not a call from the bad karma to the good karma, or even from the good karma to the bad karma. It's the call from bad karma and good karma to no karma. We want to play the no karma game. And the no karma game is in the non-magnetic. The non-magnetic is beyond karma because it's beyond time and space, and it's beyond the consequentiality of the whole eye for an eye principle that works in time and space. So the Spirit of God has anointed the Christ to provide this opportunity, and in alignment with that provision of this opportunity through the Christ, the consciousness of transcendence that is always available to all creation, that we sometimes refer to as the mystical traveler consciousness, but it has gone by many, many names through the ages and the eons. It is in cooperation with that and working in alignment with that Christ consciousness as the more expedited way to come into remembrance. However, for those who don't choose to partake of this expedited approach, the old fashioned way, if we want to call that, of an eye for an eye and struggling to get from the bad karma to the good karma and hoping that if we get enough good karma, that somehow that force of all the good karma will suddenly or somehow allow us to miraculously pop into the no karma game. People are allowed to continue to play that as they choose. And the traveler consciousness will work with people in that mindset as well. It is equal opportunity. And the way we approach it is the way it meets us and greets us, which is a tremendous honoring of the process. And I'm grateful that that's there. However, I've done the other pretty extensively, and I've done both actually. And based upon my experience, I highly recommend the grace approach and playing in the non-magnetic. It's so much more rewarding, but it's also so much on track for all of us as souls and as spiritual beings to fulfill the higher intent of God, which was to come into this creation as instruments of God's learning, as God's growth, and then return back into God with those learnings to amplify God's awareness of creation and creating, and in the process to experience co-creatorship with God as a harbinger of our future participation in the handiwork of God. So I kind of talked about stuff I've talked about before, but I thought this would be a little bit more complete explanation of it. It's interesting. A lot of our work in progression when we're trying to get more into alignment with the Christ action and the Christ opportunity, we're choosing into that rather than a different approach on this planet, which was here prior to this Christ opportunity, which we would often call an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth, and the way of karmic law, or sometimes called the Luciferian approach. And a lot of our ascension and growth is connected to learning to choose the grace and the path of learning which leads to that grace under the Christ opportunity rather than the perfectionism and the eye for an eye approach under the Luciferian plan. And yet, very interestingly and very differently, the freeing of ourselves of magnetic fields, it can free us somewhat from the Luciferian approach. But in many ways, freeing ourselves from magnetic field actually has more to do with freeing ourselves from a consciousness which is, in a sense, set up into this creation, sort of by its nature, to hold souls into this creation perpetually. Now, the Luciferian plan actually is a plan where you can get out of creation. You just have to do it an eye for an eye, karmic law, perfectionism, which is a very, very difficult way to do it. So we're schooled in the idea of, yeah, that's the one I gotta recognize. That's trying to trap me and hold me here into that righteous law approach instead of choosing the forgiving and the grace. And so that's a big thing for us in our progression. But the secondary thing we have to look at is just the fundamental binding of ourselves to this just because of the illusion of all this. And the force behind that is often equated with Lucifer, but it's actually a different force. But Lucifer works with it or utilizes it, but a more probably appropriate name for it would be one that comes out of India, which we call is the call power. And John Roger talked a lot about the call power and the loyal forces of the opposition. The Hindus would talk about the Maya or the illusion that holds us here. All this, in a sense, is connected to what we would call the call power. So Lucifer will try and beguile us and hold us here, but what he's really trying to do is not as much trying to hold us here, he's trying to hold us to an approach, the approach of an eye for an eye, the approach of the law. The call power is trying to hold every being here. It's almost, you could think of the call power. This is a strange way to do it. I haven't told many people this, but it was explained to me once in the spirit. If I really wanted to understand the call power, I could think of the call powers like the ego of the God of the soul realm. Like a God that was sort of the last manifestation beyond time and space that put his imprint into time and space. It's almost like when our soul comes out of the spirit, when come into our mother, and then we're birthed and we take that first breath, we start to participate in the time space experience. And then those first couple of years, the ego is formed, our personal ego. That's why they call it the terrible twos, because the ego is, what is the ego? It's our sense of separate existence. So you could think of the call power as kind of like the sense of separate existence that came into being by the God form manifesting these distinctions in time and space. So I don't know if that helps you at all, but it was something I was kind of moved to tell you. And don't know if I can think of one person I told this to. So, but anyway, it's the way I was taught to understand it. And freeing ourselves from the magnetic fields is often having to free ourselves from a tie to the call power. So it's a little bit different. So I'm explaining a lot of metaphysical things to you that will help you as you come more and more into remembrance, to know what it is that when you feel like it's there, but you can't quite get there, what could be obstructing you. And often it's just a magnetic field. And sometimes it's a beautiful one that another time was wonderful for you, but it's not in your service now, so you let it go. Anyway, that's my talk for tonight. We're going to do questions and answers, but first I'm going to turn it over to Lee for some guidelines and stuff, and then we'll see what kind of questions we get. Thank you for listening. I hope that had some value for all of you. I tend to talk about what I'm shown in the week, and then spending a night talking about the difference between magnetic light and the non-magnetic was enough for me to figure, well, maybe it's time to talk to you about that too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. So valuable for me. And I just look forward to getting the archive, the recording of this gathering that's available to all of us to listen to that, and especially that new information again. I'll now share guidelines for questions. Questions are to be about a way of God's remembrance and what Michael has shared. To ask a question, please raise your Zoom hand. You can find that by hovering near the bottom of your Zoom window, click on the React button, a pop-up appears, and then you choose Raise Hand. Please also turn on your video for full participation. If you are on a low bandwidth connection and are unable to do that, so be it. Most important, and since so many of us have had the blessing of working with Michael over so many years to clear so many things, this is not that. Please do not ask questions of a personal nature, and do not ask Michael for assistance in clearing. Questions are to be for your benefit, the benefit of those of us gathered, and those who will participate via the archives. We ask that you look to the integrity of your intentions before asking a question of Michael, and thank you for your cooperation. And Now I will share the legal consent. By raising your hand and asking questions of Michael, you are giving full consent to Awake to Love to make the audio and video of this gathering, including your sharing, available as online archives for anyone to access. Please do not raise your hand and do not share unless you are in full agreement. Thank you. Michael, hands are manifesting.
I only see a couple, so maybe it'll be a short night. Gary Bierman.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, sorry, no video. Okay, so big question. So you and John Roger have talked about God. I've also heard the term spirit. I've heard undifferentiated consciousness. I've heard it talked about as God manifested creation to learn about itself and creating time and space and separate consciousnesses to then learn and then go back and and serve the whole. And my question is, like, where did God come out of something? Was there a prior condition to God? Why are things the way they are? Why is creation and God manifest the way it is? If it's a oneness, why did it need to exist in this way and create in this way? And what did it come out of? I know these are probably big impossible questions, and maybe I'm being too linear, but this is what I've been thinking and wondering about.
Well, it's neat that you ponder that. Yeah, those are kind of big questions. Let me see what I can share about this. Um, there's different ways that it's been described and looked at as I've heard the idea that, sort of God is sort of like the conscience of spirit. If we want to talk about the differentiation of God, there is this reality of God. You asked so many questions. You kind of asked one big question, but there's so many facets to it. John Roger talked about a way to sort of see or visualize or map it of this physical level and the levels of subtler dimensions that were in time and space, the astral plane, the causal plane, the mental plane, the etheric plane, into the soul realm. We're getting above the time and space and getting above karma. But then there's other dimensions of spirit where there is differentiation. He referenced the 27 of them, going up to the point where you get beyond levels. There is all that, and then beyond those 27 levels, there's more spirit or higher beingnesses that do exist. Beyond that, there's what we call the Trinity, which is a place where there's convergence of the creative streams that come out of the totality of God that bring all things into manifest. There are those beingness there that we call the silent ones. When you're in that in that part of creation, there is silence. It's beyond this. It's the sound current goes beyond a place where you could hear it. And so there's just that. And the silent ones have an interesting function that they simultaneously exist in manifest creation and in unmanifest creation. So their existence is they're existing in the paradox of both. It's like you'd say, well, part of them is in this totally unmanifest state, and part of them is in this total manifested state, and they are then our servants of God, that where the will of God comes out of that unmanifest condition for the manifest condition, they're the instrument of it, and they're the overseers, the ultimate overseers of the manifestation consciousness, that we call the traveler consciousness, comes out of that place of the silent ones. That's why it's everywhere and everything in all manifestation, because it sources from that which is at the very pinnacle of that. There is existence and an unmanifest state of God that can be known, but you can't know it as a soul. You have to know it as spirit. It's very, very hard to get into because it's not that you could never get into it, just you wouldn't come back normally simply because in a sense, let's say the experience of it, or to experience reality as it's experienced in that, is so different, but also so complete that rarely do beings go into that and come back. But it's there for those who may one day, or you might go up into it, and maybe one day you'll go back. When they say you'll go back into the heart of God, maybe you'll go back and be in that, in a state of, it's like a state of pure potential. It's a state where anything could be, but at this point, nothing is. And again, I'm lying to you when I talk about it like that, because there is even distinction in that, but I couldn't tell you how and why, how you would define it or know it, but it's there. And all of this is part of what's going on here. Now, all the whys of it are where it gets interesting. You say, well, why'd God do this? And this is more like, well, this is kind of like what's going on and why? I, that I don't really know. Sort of the idea of God as a creative experimenter makes sense in terms of the vastness of this creation. I mean, just what they're discovering in this universe of galaxies and then galaxies beyond galaxies, and they're talking about even in this universe, they're tracking light coming from something. The thing I was reading was something like 43 billion light years away in just this universe. And John Rogers talked about, well, right now in this particular instance of creation, there's 108 universes, which is like the 108 prayer beads and the model beads. There's one for every universe. And then there's a 109th universe being created. And that's in what we call this issuance of creation. Now, this is not the first issuance of creation. God has issued forth whole creations and universes before, issued them forth and existed, and all these things have taken place. And at some point, like the Tibetans with the sand mandala, where they make the mandala and then they go, wow, and they study it, and which they go, okay, and they go, erase it and start again. Well, the issuance of God is kind of like that. So I remember looking at the issuance with John Roger at one point when we were working many years ago, and I don't remember if he brought the question I did, but the idea was, well, how long will this particular issuance that we're in, will it last? And his information was about 375 billion years for this issuance. Yeah, but what about the issuances before? And what about the time between the issuances? So if you think of God as like this incredible consciousness that is just maybe saying, I'm bored, let's see what I can create. Maybe it's that. I don't know. It's never been shared or shown to me, all the whys of it. It's just that seems to be what's going on. God as this creator issues forth these extraordinary creations, and then to understand the dynamic of an experience that God then individuates itself to have multiple perspectives into what's been created. Those multiple perspectives, you could say, you mean the soul? Yeah, the soul, but the soul's not the only perspective God will use to have a perspective on its creation. Though God will individuate itself in even other ways to have a perspective on its creation, there are spirit forms that are, let's say, we could say beyond the soul, but still have differentiation with the spirit, and they are also used within the creation for God to have an experience of creation. An example of that might be, you might have a consciousness that would be coming in to be It's going to be the consciousness, let's say, of a sun in a solar system, and the whole progression of the life of that sun, and then the life of the evolving of all the planets, and the coming and going of life and conscious and change. And it's, in a sense, learning through all of it. One conscious is learning through all that. Or maybe a conscious that for a planet like Earth, we say Gaia, Mother Earth, it comes forward, and it is a consciousness that is not only learning about being a planet, but it's incorporating the learning of every consciousness is on that planet. To think what a vast consciousness that must be, not simply to be conscious of everything going on the planet in terms of its geography and its condition and its different elements and the life on its surface, but also what's going on in the souls that are growing there. And it's interfaced with all of that. So there are divisions or individuations out of the Godhead that have tremendous capacity. And the tremendous capacity is that they have is some of them we could say have tremendous capacity to manage it all. Like we could say like a god of the soul realm. In the Indian traditions, they talk about the god of the soul realm. They talk about the Sugma, the Sarmad. These are just, we could just say these are differentiations of God that track and manage and are involved in the learning of all these different dimensions and universes. And so we think of consciousness to say could maybe there's some staggering number. Maybe there's 10 to the 21st power consciousnesses that it is this one God is interfaced with and is connected to and is involved in their process and involved in their learning and involved in the managing of how that all works. You'd say, wow, what a consciousness. So the whole of creation and then the whole of the beyond what we think of as creation, which is also a creation, but it's not governed by time and space, but but it still has differentiation. There are facets and formulations of the Godhead, of the intelligence, of the consciousness of the spirit itself that is learning and informing itself and about what's going on. And so when you and I transcend the soulic expression, we come back into the truth of ourselves as coming out of spirit and in truth, that our true existence is as spirit. And maybe we finish with time and space. That doesn't mean we're all done. Then we may operate in some form, one of these forms of the spirit that's having a greater thing. It could be you come back into one of these extraordinary number of worlds and operate as, now you're going to operate as a planet, as the conscious of that planet. And you take it from the conception of the planet, maybe it's a ball of fire, and you watch the whole process of it, and then the learning and life comes on it, and different species and growth and maybe even human type creatures, and you're just kind of learning the whole game. And so when they say eternally traveling consciousness, it's we use that word traveling, but it's really eternally expanding consciousness, internally growing consciousness, eternally learning consciousness. And so God is that endless infinite learner, and every aspect of itself is like a smaller version of itself, and therefore it is also an endless infinite learner. And so you get that endless infinite learner, and when you get a consciousness that gets transcends and transcends stuff, and the endless infinite learner, would they say that eternally traveling consciousness, when you come to that point of that complete of the learning, you become one with that instead of the eternally learning consciousness, it's still learning, but it becomes the eternally teaching consciousness. That is often understood in the spirit world as what we've often called the traveler consciousness. It is eternally teaching all of itself about itself. It is eternally conveying the remembrance and holding the memory of remembrance and truth. And so I don't know if that's really answers your question, but because the pondering of it is fine. The need for that answer is it's not a necessary answer because part of you just asked that question can't really know it. The only part that can know it is the part of you that is it. And so it's come awake to yourself as spirit, and you'll start to really know this. And eventually you'll know it as it. And then whatever dimensionality of God you get into, you'll know that dimension as it's known by that dimension. You'll know reality as that, as it's as if you get into the Sugmat or the Sarmat or the Sachkan or any of these very exotic names that are given to these forces of the God nature, you will know and you will know reality as it's known by that force. Now, whether you'll be able to come back here and contain it and spout it, I kept my doubts. Because you kind of know it, you're there, and you come back and say, oh, somebody says, well, explain it. It's like suddenly somebody poured the information of, 10 million encyclopedias in your head. You say, well, tell us about it. And you're like, well, you may know it, but not be able to talk about it. But that's okay because talking about it doesn't really do anything for people. It's the experiencing of it that it's really all about. And a way of God's remembrance is about experiencing what is so, not just having a cerebral understanding of it. That cerebral understanding may seem very valuable to you. It may have some value to you, but it could also be an undermining force for you because it could be something that you use to placate yourself and think, well, that's enough that I have some understanding of it. The only thing that is the real treasure is the knowing of it. And you know it by being one with it and experiencing reality, not about it, but from it. And that is the call that's come forth out of God through the Christ and the traveler consciousness, that all parts of God, all parts of itself will come into the total knowing of itself. And so this is really the deeper thing, not one soul will be lost. And God loves all of its creation because God is all of its creation. And God is going to bring all of the parts of itself that have been extended into the time-space game back into the truth of itself. And the truth of itself means that all those parts will know that they are that truth. So this is something for all of us. So that's kind of a big answer to a big question. I have no idea if it covered what you're looking for, but that's what I got.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Amazing. My mind is blown. My consciousness is shaking, and I appreciate you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, we're going to go to, I'd like to do people I haven't talked to before, but I can't remember who I've talked to. How about, is that Sal's? Sal's, we'll do you. We'll do you.
Hey, Michael,
Hey, Sal's,
how are you?
I'm good.
Thanks for doing all these talks. I mean, I really appreciate them, and I learn every week I learn something new. I don't know if I have a question, but something that was something triggered me when you were talking in your intro about when you keep playing the no karma, because it feels to me that whenever we do anything in this world, our ego gets involved, our mind, our emotions, our body, our sensations. That's how we perceive the world. And so, and I'm sure when we come into this world, we come with the best intentions. We come with the intention of succeeding and going off, for good, but we keep coming back, right? So, so what is it that you play no karma? What is it? Because you always say like, oh no, there's nothing to do, but so it feels like, where are we? I feel like, am I doing something? Am I don't know if I'm expressing myself really well, but I'm confused. That's really it. And I understand there's a part of me that's smart enough to understand that, yeah, that no karma is that neutrality, and I'm not doing it because I'm not getting my ego involved, and therefore there's liberation in that. but maybe you could, maybe explain that for me so that I can get a bit better.
I'll see what I can do. Karma is what attracts. To be here, to have physicality, we will have karma. There'll be actions we're involved in here. The freedom from all this really comes from freeing ourselves from identifying with all of this, identifying with the body, identifying with this story of us. It's that identification that is the problem, not the experiencing here. Simultaneously, while you're experiencing reality here as an individual in the body and all the whole game you're going through, simultaneous to that, uh, the truth of you, let's call it your soul, although that's in a way not even the true truth of you. The true truth of you is the spirit. But even then, for you, even as a soul, part of your consciousness is existing in all of this. Think of like I've used this analogy before, like here you are the soul, and you stick your hand in the water. Okay, so let's say the water's creation. You say, well, I got a bunch of fingers. Well, maybe I stick my fingers into, as a soul, we'll make it simple, into 5 different lives. And right now, and so your soul is so in each of these things, none of these lives is conscious of what's going on in the other one. If they start to become conscious of it down here, it leads to insanity. So there's a protection against that. Sometimes people in the use of drugs blow through that and they're in big trouble because the realities are so different sometimes. And so yet back here, back in the truth of it, this soul, I'm always with God. The soul is always in this knowing of my oneness with God. I'm beyond time and space and the truth of me existing in this oneness. But I've entered into time and space. I've stuck my hand into the game. And the parts of my consciousness that are playing that out go into a forgetting. And so the remembrance is really bringing these parts of myself back to the remembrance that the soul has of itself as being this instrument of God. So the great path of becoming that the world kind of hooks us in is this idea that somehow I have to change, like this is me and my life, this is Saul's doing his life here. Somehow I got to climb back up here and become aware of all of this. So I have to change. Something's wrong. I don't know now. It means I'm doing something wrong. I have to do something different down here on this level so that I can come awake to this knowing of oneness with God. But the truth is, the part of who I really am always knows it's oneness with God. This part that's in the forgetfulness. And so the game of the world keeps saying, I have to do it better. I have to be smarter. I have to achieve more. I have to pray harder. I have to sacrifice more. I have to have no more interest in this world. And then I can be enlightened, which is I can come awake. Now there are degrees of enlightenment in there. I woke up. It's like if you kind of considered the initiation, just say, well, and I got my astral initiation, I moved up and I said, wow, I started to realize I was more than my imagination. And then I started to move up to the cause. I started to realize I'm more than these feelings. I started to move up above the mind. And this is a big one. This is where a lot of enlightened people, or at least they think they're truly enlightened, or they can move above the mind. So much of the samadhi, nirvana type things that a lot of traditions are doing are beings that have awakened beyond this point. That's why a lot of these traditions, they'll talk about the great emptiness of God. But that's just the void part of the etheric. Then you find a path that takes you through the etheric, you get above the remembrance of this, and suddenly you realize, wow, I'm more than the finger. Wow, now I'm here. Now you're starting to get into the soul. But you still, but then you got, well, that's the whole thing. Well, you got to get up. You start to realize, wait a minute, I'm just, I'm connected to God. You start to, but simultaneously, why? Because you have a physical body, you're living this, but you're knowing that. You're living it, you're knowing it. Eventually, you come into the remembrance, and you really come into remembrance. You know you're this, but you know you've always been this. And you know, you've really never been this, but you were having the experience of it. I mean, you were never that what seemed like truth here in your finger, you realize was never really truth, but it was experience you were having because you were in this illusion of time and space. And that the learnings that came out of your participation in time and space have great value to you as a soul. You take the learning of that and you take that back to God. The actual experiences are left behind. It's like the Akashic record is a record of everything happens. That's always there in time and space. The Nakal record, which is up here at the bridge to the soul in the Rukmuni Canal, that's the soulic record. That's the record of what the soul learned. Is that's the part it takes and gives back into the truth of itself as a soul. Now, the stuff I'm talking about is when you start to come back into that remembrance of yourself as the soul, you can there and you start to move up into dimensions above the soul plane, you know, those dimensions that John Roger talked about. As you start to move up in those levels, pretty soon you can't really know what's going on those levels as the soul. You have to sort of surrender the truth of the soul into this greater truth that you're really spirit. And then you can start to have consciousness into those dimensions of reality. And that the higher you go into those undifferentiated or less differentiated realms of God, the more you have to know it as a spirit. So going all the way back to what we started about, even right now, while you're here existing as souls, you have other existences in time and space where your soul is learning and growing, but you don't know about those yet. When could you know about those other existences? Yes, you could, but you won't be allowed to know about them until you get very, very high up. If you can become conscious in the spirit, you can know about your other existences. John Roger was able to do that. He knew about all sorts of existences and other things he was doing. It was very interesting. We go into these strange parts of reality. So, oh, yeah, I have a form there. I keep it there to know what's going on there. It was just so interesting. He was so at home in all those places because he was going in there not as a very evolved soul, but as spirit, as a spirit self. Every one of us will come back into the remembrance of ourself as spirit. But before that, we've got to come back into the remembrance of ourself as the soul. So it is a progressive thing, but it's not working the way we tend to see it working from down here in time and space. And the powers that would hold us into this know that. And so when we're less evolved, they just endlessly control us through all the seduction of the senses and the seductions of the ego and the seductions of being somebody, achieving something, acquiring something, all these things that we don't keep. But somehow we'll make all those things important enough that we'll chase them. But eventually that game starts to fall apart and we realize it's not enough. And so we start to long for the more that we sense, like here we are, this finger, we sense that there's more to me than this thing I'm stirring my finger around in. And then it goes, and you can get there, but you're going to have to be different to get there. You're going to have to change who you are. You're going to have to become nicer, gooder. You're going to have to be pure. You're going to have to act just the right way. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to all these rules. If you're a Muslim, you have to follow these rules. If you're Jewish, you have to find all these rules. If you have to, you have to do this, you have to do this, and eventually, if you do all that right, and you sit in a cave for 40 years, and you'll get there. And that's part of what keeps us caught here forever, not forever, but for so long, because it's just a fundamental illusion. It's not something we become, it's something we are. And we've always been. Now, I can talk to you about it, but for you, the whole thing is just to experience it and to know it. And yet, the great promise of spirit is that you will know it, that we all will know it, because it is ordained, and that eventually God will redeem all of it. So I don't know if that helped you at all, but that's what I'm telling you about it.
No, it did help. I think you mentioned that before. It was just, so I think I'm still caught in the timing. It's like, okay, what is it? Is it is it patience? It doesn't look like, there's something I can do I mean, that's what you say. I cannot accelerate it. It's like, oh God, what can I do to accelerate this? And there's nothing. It doesn't feel like there's anything except
Right.
surrendering and saying, oh, God's
And
doing it.
no, it's
Put
just
my
over.
hands in the air. Say, God's
There are a
doing it.
lot of things you do, but you reframe the things you do instead of doing your tone, like chanting your initiation tones and chanting names of God as part of the great path of becoming. You understand it differently. You say, oh, these are just keys of remembrance. These are like mnemonic devices helping me remember. It's like I'm using these to help remembrance take place. And how the remembrance is taking place, everything will start to reverse for you. Instead of you being looking for God, suddenly you'll be God looking. And then you'll know it's really coming about. But you can mock that up and practice it because we can use the tools of the imagination. We can use our ambition and our drive. But at a certain point, the ideas that were driving us, like our ambition, I remember when I wanted to be a soul initiate, then I wanted to be, and I was using this drive. I was just mostly driven by my pain, this terrible suffering I had been going through since, I don't know, I rolled my car when I was 17 years old. I talked about it last week. From that time on, I had this terrible suffering. And somehow I just was trying to get free of that suffering. And so I was very driven. But at a certain point, that ambition to be free of pain, that ambition to be wiser, that ambition to be anything different was not going to work. And since that became an obstacle. Why? Because it was my ambition, it was my drive. And the thing that was in the way of the greater remembrance that was there for me was me. And so what I had to let go was the whole story of me, the whole game of separation, the whole pretense of individuation. So, but while we're working the process, and because every time we come back in this body, we pick up the story of individuality, what we do then is we utilize it. But we can utilize it while simultaneously know that it's like a game we're playing, but we're utilizing it. Recognizing that the greater truth is the Father and I are one. Jesus said it. He said, these things I do, you too shall do, and even greater. When John Rogers says the blessings already are, and Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is at hand, they're saying we're already with God. We're just not aware of it.
Right.
And so Jesus' quote where he says, of myself, I can do nothing. It is the Father doing his own work through me who accomplishes all things. I was told something about Jesus many years ago, and it kind of rocked me when I heard it, because I was always picturing Jesus as sort of the ultimate giver, the ultimate sacrifice. He sacrificed, he gave it all. And that was really the way I was understanding Jesus. And I can't remember where, but in the spirit world, somebody sort of like was correct, but they said, no, Jesus was the ultimate receiver. Jesus so totally gave up the whole story of self that he was just a completely open channel that allowed the Spirit of God to come through him in such an entirety that he could bring a transformation to a whole world and to a whole karmic flow. And so, Father, I received, and suddenly became one of my big prayers. And because my agenda as a self that was aspiring to get beyond self, which is kind of a stupid thing, but I can remember laughing about it when I was brand new to the movement. I remember hearing a tape where John Rogers said his goal was just his mind to leave him alone. I said, well, what's my goal? And it instantly came to me, I want to not want. And I realized I want to not want, which just means I don't want there to be a wanter here. I want to get beyond that wants. But how can I get beyond wanting by wanting to get beyond wanting? Just the very part of consciousness that was doing the wanting was sustaining the approach of wanting. So we surrender to this greater force of God that frees us of the illusion of self. What we do is we do things that support that surrender, that letting go. We chant to let go. We read our discourse to let go. We enter into service because the service in the giving is a form of letting go of the self. Why? Because we're not serving to gain to the self. Now, some people do it to, like they say, well, I'll get light units for it. That's nice, but that's like getting good karma. I say, yeah, we want to get in the no karma, which is I'm doing it because it's my nature to do so. Like Khalil Gibran, talk about the fruit of the tree. The prophet, you give like that tree. Look at the tree. It gives its fruit because that is its nature. We give as our nature. And so what we do is we live and exist as our nature, which is the ultimate truth of ourselves, which is divine, which is always giving because it always has the fullness to give. And so we do that and we live in that. In the process of doing that, the whole karmic game gets solved.
Thank you. I think I got it this time.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Looks like you did. All right, I think we're probably, oh my God, look at all those hands, and I think we're probably
We're
past the
actually
time.
overtime, Michael. We're about 6 minutes
Overtime. Oh
beyond
my
our
God.
intended end time, even with 3 hands awaiting.
Oh, that's torture. You know me. But I think I'm probably going to end anyway because, oh, look at all these people, all these neat people. Oh my God. I want to talk to all of them, but I can't today. We're going to have to come back next week, but I'll remember who you guys are. I don't remember a lot of things, to be honest. I won't remember what we talked about tonight, but I'll remember that we talked. Okay, those 3. So I'm going to try and remember you guys for maybe next time. All right, let's end with a quick, who knows, a quick tune into the spirit. Dearest Lord, thank you for this day and thank you for offering forth the bounty of your loving to each of us and for providing us greater wisdom that we might be more available to utilize the processes of this life to the process of remembrance, but also utilize all our gifts to the service of your purpose of learning and growing. Help us to be instruments that satisfy the divine intent. Help us to realize that you are well pleased in us, regardless of what we think or feel or how we act. Your purpose is fulfilled in us regardless, and your love for us is eternal and perpetual. We thank you for this grace, this guidance, and this gift of togetherness and unity that we've experienced tonight. Bless each of us to magnify the remembrance in each other, for together we come more into the truth of God and the celebratory nature of oneness that is entirely present in the heavens. We accept that truth, embrace that truth, and amplify that truth by allowing that celebration of love to extend into this corporeal reality, this dimension of time and space, as a gift from on high to the blessing of all. We thank you once again, Lord. May thy will be done. I ask for a special blessing here for my wife, Alicia. She's finishing a book she's been writing. It's due tomorrow at the publishers. So I'd like you all to send her light for the writing of that book. Thank you, and God bless you all. Amen.